The Nebraska wind howled across the barren plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the bitter taste of dust and despair. Sarah McKenna stood at the doorway of her weathered cabin, her calloused hands gripping the rough wooden frame as she watched the sun bleach the already parched earth. It was August of 1882, and the drought had stretched on for 3 months, turning the once promising homestead into a monument to hardship. "Mama, I'm hungry." Thomas's small voice drifted from inside the cabin. Her 6-year-old son had learned not to complain much these past months, but hunger was a persistent companion that even a child's resilience couldn't ignore. "I know, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "Supper will be ready soon." She turned back to the pot hanging over the meager fire, stirring the thin soup made from the last of their preserved vegetables and a rabbit Thomas had managed to snare 2 days ago. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Samuel would have known how to make it last longer, how to stretch their supplies. But Samuel was gone, buried these past 8 months in the small cemetery plot behind the hill, another victim of the Jameson gang's brutality. The memory of that December morning still haunted her. The riders approaching fast. Samuel grabbing his rifle, telling her to take Thomas and hide in the root cellar. The gunshots, the terrible silence that followed. By the time she emerged, Samuel lay in the frost-covered dirt, his blood seeping into the ground he'd worked so hard to cultivate. Sarah shook her head, dispelling the memories. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past, not when the present demanded every ounce of her strength. The neighbors, those who remained, whispered about her behind their hands at Sunday service. A young widow, barely 25, trying to run a homestead alone. It wasn't proper. They said it wasn't natural. "Mama, someone's coming," Thomas called from the window, his voice tinged with the wariness that had replaced his childhood innocence too soon. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to the Winchester propped against the wall. She'd learned to keep it loaded and within reach always, but as she peered through the dusty glass, her shoulders relaxed slightly. The lone rider approaching wasn't a stranger, but Jake Colton, sitting easy in the saddle of his bay mare, a familiar figure against the harsh landscape. Jake had been Samuel's closest friend, a fellow homesteader from the neighboring valley, where Samuel had been stocky and fair. Jake was lean and dark, with eyes the color of winter sky and hands that spoke of hard work and harder choices. He'd been at the funeral, had helped dig the grave when the ground was frozen solid. Since then, he'd appeared at odd intervals, always with a purpose, never staying longer than necessary. "Mr. Colton's here," Thomas announced, a note of relief in his voice. Jake was one of the few men who didn't make the boy nervous. Sarah smoothed her worn calico dress and stepped onto the porch as Jake dismounted. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting, a gesture both respectful and distant. "Mrs. McKenna," he said, his voice low and measured. "Noticed your fence was down on the north side when I rode by yesterday. Thought I'd come by and fix it before your cattle stray." "We don't have any cattle left, Mr. Colton," Sarah replied, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. She'd sold the last 2 heifers a month ago to pay for flour and ammunition. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "All the same, best to keep the fence up. Never know when things might turn around." He didn't wait for her response, simply walked to his saddlebags and pulled out a hammer and a small sack of nails. Sarah watched him stride toward the broken fence line, his movements purposeful and efficient. She should refuse his help. Accepting charity from a single man would only fuel more gossip, but pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Can I help him, Mama?" Thomas asked eagerly. The boy missed male company, missed having someone to teach him the things a father should. "You may," Sarah said softly, "but don't get in his way." As Thomas scampered after Jake, Sarah returned to her cooking, adding a precious pinch of salt to the pot. Through the window, she could see Jake showing Thomas how to hold the fence post steady while he hammered. The boy's face was lit with concentration, hanging on Jake's every word. An hour later, Jake and Thomas returned, the boy chattering excitedly about the proper way to mend a fence. Jake's expression softened as he listened to the child's enthusiasm, but it shuddered again when he met Sarah's eyes. "I brought some seed corn," he said, producing another sack from his horse. "Had extra from last year's harvest. Thought you might use it for a late planting in the east field." Sarah's pride flared. "We're not taking charity, Mr. Colton." "It's not charity," Jake replied evenly. "It's what Samuel would have done for me if our situations were reversed. He was always talking about crop rotation, about that east field. Seems a shame to let his plans go to waste." The mention of Samuel's name hung between them like a physical presence. Sarah saw something flicker in Jake's eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or something deeper she didn't want to examine. "Thank you," she said finally, the words difficult to form. "Thomas, go put the seed corn in the barn." As the boy ran off with the sack, Jake shifted his weight, clearly preparing to leave, but something made him hesitate. "The boy's growing fast," he observed. "He'll need to learn to ride soon. A man needs to know how to handle a horse out here." "I can teach him," Sarah said quickly, though they both knew their old plow horse was hardly suitable for riding lessons. "My mare's gentle," Jake continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "I could bring her by sometime, if you've no objection, just for an hour or two, when I can spare the time." Sarah wanted to refuse. She knew what the town gossips would say if Jake Colton started spending time at her homestead, but she looked at Thomas, returning from the barn with straw in his hair and hope in his eyes, and her resolve weakened. "That's kind of you," she said carefully. "Perhaps after the harvest season, when things are less busy." Jake nodded, understanding the delicate balance she was trying to maintain. "After harvest, then—" He moved toward his horse, then paused. "You need anything, Mrs. McKenna, anything at all, you send the boy to my place. It's what Samuel would want." "We're managing fine," Sarah replied, lifting her chin. Jake studied her for a moment, the patched dress, the hollow in her cheeks that hadn't been there last winter, the steel in her spine that had always been there. "I know you are," he said quietly. "But the offer stands." He swung into the saddle with easy grace, touched his hat brim again, and rode off without looking back. Sarah watched until he disappeared over the rise, then turned to find Thomas watching her with those two wise eyes. "I like Mr. Colton," the boy said simply. "He's different from the other men who come around." Sarah knew what he meant. Since Samuel's death, there had been others, men who looked at the land with greedy eyes and at her with something worse. Men who made offers wrapped in sympathy but lined with ulterior motives. Jake had never looked at her that way. His gaze held something else entirely, something carefully controlled and deliberately distant. "Come inside," she said to Thomas. "Supper's ready." As they sat down to their meager meal, Sarah found herself thinking about Jake's hands as he'd worked on the fence, strong and sure, patient as he'd taught Thomas. She pushed the thought away. She had no room in her life for such foolishness. Her focus had to be on survival, on keeping the homestead running and her son safe. But later that night, as she lay on the narrow bed listening to Thomas's peaceful breathing and the coyotes howling in the distance, she remembered the seed corn. It wasn't charity. Jake had said it was what Samuel would have done. And maybe that was true. But Samuel would never have looked at her the way Jake had in that unguarded moment before he'd ridden away. A look that spoke of promises unspoken and a yearning carefully kept in check. Sarah turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes tight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new struggles to face. She couldn't afford to think about gray-blue eyes and gentle hands, about the way Jake had said her name like it was something precious. She was Samuel McKenna's widow, and that was all she could allow herself to be. But in her dreams, the wind sounded less like sorrow and more like possibility. carrying with it the echo of hoofbeats and the promise of something she didn't dare name. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a bank clerk who looked uncomfortable sitting atop his borrowed horse. Sarah saw him coming from the kitchen window and felt her stomach tighten. Official visitors rarely brought good news. Mrs. McKenna. The young man dismounted awkwardly, pulling an envelope from his coat. From First National Bank of Lincoln. Sarah took the letter with steady hands, though her heart was racing. "Thank you," she managed, waiting until he'd ridden off before breaking the seal. The words swam before her eyes. Notice of disputed title, mineral rights. Prior claim by Mr. Josiah Hartley. 30 days to provide counter-documentation. She read it twice more before the full meaning sank in. Josiah Hartley, the territory's wealthiest rancher, was claiming her land based on some obscure mineral rights from before she and Samuel had filed their homestead claim. It was legal theft, dressed up in official language. Mama, Thomas stood in the doorway, worry creasing his young face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart," Sarah forced a smile. "Just grown-up business." "Why don't you go check on the chickens?" She waited until he'd gone before allowing herself to sink into Samuel's old chair. 30 days. She had 30 days to find documents she wasn't sure existed, to fight a man who owned judges like other men owned horses. The next morning, Sarah put on her best dress, the blue one with only 2 patches, and hitched up their old plow horse to the wagon. The trip to town was necessary. She needed supplies, and more importantly, she needed to find out exactly what she was facing. Lincoln's Main Street bustled with activity. Sarah kept her head high as she tied up outside Morrison's general store, ignoring the whispers that followed her. She'd grown accustomed to being the subject of gossip, but today the stares seemed more pointed, the whispers more cruel. Inside Morrison's, she selected her purchases carefully. Flour, salt, a small bag of sugar for Thomas, ammunition for the Winchester. She was counting out her precious coins when she heard Prudence Hartley's distinctive voice. "Well, I suppose some people simply don't know when they're not wanted," Prudence said to her companion, Mrs. Wellington, loud enough to carry across the store. Clinging to land they can't properly work, refusing decent offers of help. It's pride, plain and simple. Sarah's hand stilled on her coins, but she didn't turn around. "And that poor child," Mrs. Wellington added with false sympathy, "growing up in such circumstances. Why? I heard Jake Colton has been spending time there, fixing fences, he claims." "Fixing fences," Prudence repeated with a laugh that tinkled like broken glass. "Is that what they're calling it now?" Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks, but she completed her transaction in silence. As she turned to leave, she found Prudence blocking her path. Josiah Hartley's wife was everything Sarah wasn't: soft, perfumed, swathed in silk that had never known a day's hard work. "Mrs. McKenna." Prudence's smile was sharp as a blade. "How fortunate. My husband has been hoping to speak with you about that unfortunate misunderstanding regarding your claim." "There's no misunderstanding," Sarah replied evenly. "My husband filed that claim properly. We have the deed." "Deeds can be so complicated." Prudence sighed dramatically. "All those legal terms, prior claims, mineral rights. Really, it's too much for a woman to understand. That's why Josiah has made such a generous offer to buy you out. You could start fresh somewhere more suitable." "My home is suitable enough. Thank you." Prudence's eyes hardened. "Pride goes before a fall, Mrs. McKenna, and you have such a long way to fall." Sarah pushed past her and out of the store, her purchases clutched tight. She was loading the wagon when a shadow fell across her. "Afternoon, Mrs. McKenna." She looked up to find Bull Henderson looming over her. Hartley's foreman was a mountain of a man with hands like ham hocks and eyes like a snake's. His presence here, now, was no coincidence. Hey, Mr. Henderson, she acknowledged coolly, continuing to arrange her supplies. Heard you got Mr. Hartley's letter, Bull said, leaning against her wagon with casual menace. He's a reasonable man, willing to pay fair price for what's rightfully his anyway. The land belongs to me and my son. My husband earned it fair and square. Bull chuckled, a sound like grinding stone. Your husband's dead, in case you forgot. And a woman alone. Well, he reached out to finger a strand of her hair that had escaped her bonnet. Accidents happen on the frontier. Terrible accidents. Sarah jerked away. Don't touch me. Touchy. Bull grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Better to take Mr. Hartley's offer while it stands. Better for you, better for the boy. Be a shame if something happened to that old plow horse, or if your well went bad, or if fire broke out in that dry barn of yours. Are you threatening me? Threatening? Bull's eyes widened in mock innocence. Just observing how dangerous frontier life can be. Why, remember what happened to your husband Jameson, gang? Wasn't it funny how outlaws know exactly which homesteads to hit? The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. Before she could respond, another voice cut through the air. Henderson. Jake Colton stood 10 feet away, his hand resting casual on his gun belt. He'd appeared silent as a ghost, positioned where he had a clear shot if needed. Bull straightened slowly. Colton, this ain't your concern. Lady's trying to load her wagon. Seems you're in her way. Just having a friendly conversation. Conversation's over. Jake's voice was mild, but his eyes were winter ice. Bull held his gaze for a long moment, then stepped back with exaggerated courtesy. You think on what I said, Mrs. McKenna, Mr. Hartley's offer won't stand forever. He sauntered away, whistling tunelessly. Sarah realized her hands were shaking. You all right? Jake asked quietly, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. Fine, Sarah said automatically, then shook her head. No, not fine. They're trying to steal my land, and I don't know how to stop them. Jake's jaw tightened. Hartley's been doing this for years. Files old mineral claims, disputes titles, waits for people to give up or get scared off. What documentation do you have? The homestead deed, Samuel's claim papers, but Hartley's saying there was a prior claim. There wasn't, Jake said flatly. I was with Samuel when he filed. That land was clean. He paused, considering. You need a lawyer. With what money? Sarah laughed bitterly. I can barely afford flour. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then, you should keep that rifle close, and maybe move your important papers somewhere safe. Fires have been known to happen when Hartley wants something. The casual way he said it chilled her more than Bull's threats. He wouldn't. He would. Jake helped her up onto the wagon seat. I'll ride back with you. Make sure you get home safe. People will talk. Let them. His voice held an edge. Better gossip than a grave. They rode in silence, Jake on his mare keeping pace with the wagon. Sarah was acutely aware of his presence, the way he constantly scanned the horizon, the controlled readiness in his posture. This was not the gentleman who'd taught Thomas about fence posts. This was someone who'd survived the frontier by being harder than it was. As they neared her homestead, Jake spoke again. That offer to teach Thomas to ride still stands. Boy should know how to handle a horse and a gun, just in case. Sarah looked at him sharply. Oh, you think it'll come to that? I think Hartley doesn't like being told no, and I think he cut himself off. What? Jake was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, I think Samuel would haunt me if I let anything happen to you or the boy. There was something in his voice, carefully controlled but present nonetheless. Sarah felt it resonate in her chest. A dangerous warmth she couldn't afford. We're not your responsibility, Mr. Colton. No, he agreed, but that doesn't change anything. At the homestead, he helped her unload the supplies, then checked the doors and windows, showing her how to better secure them. His movements were efficient, practical, but Sarah caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. "I'll come by day after tomorrow," he said finally. "Bring my mare for Thomas." "Jake," she stopped, realizing she'd used his first name. Something flared in his eyes before he shuddered it away. "Keep that rifle loaded. Sarah, and if Henderson comes around again, you fire first and ask questions later. A woman protecting her home has rights even Hartley can't dispute." He touched his hat and was gone, leaving Sarah standing in her doorway with her heart racing and her mind churning. The sun was setting, painting the sky blood red, and she couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was coming, one that would test every ounce of strength she possessed. That night, she moved their important papers to a metal box and hid it beneath a loose floorboard. She loaded the Winchester and placed it beside her bed, and when Thomas asked if Mr. Colton was coming back, she said yes, probably, and tried not to think about why that made her feel both safer and more endangered than she'd ever been. The smell of smoke woke her. Sarah jolted upright, her heart hammering as the acrid scent filled her nostrils. Through the window, she could see orange flames licking at the barn walls, already consuming the dry timber with hungry fury. "Thomas," she shook her son awake, pulling him from bed. "Get dressed, quickly." Still groggy, the boy obeyed as Sarah grabbed the Winchester and the metal box containing their papers. The fire was spreading fast, too fast to be natural. As they stumbled onto the porch, she saw them 3 riders silhouetted against the burning barn, watching their handiwork with satisfaction. Bull Henderson sat his horse in the center, his massive frame unmistakable even in the dancing shadows. "Evening, Mrs. McKenna," he called out, touching his hat mockingly. "Shame about your barn. These old buildings, they're like tinder boxes in this drought." "You did this!" Sarah raised the rifle, but her hands shook with rage and fear. Now, Bull chuckled. "Can't go making accusations without proof. We were just riding by, saw the flames, thought we'd check if you needed help." The other 2 men laughed. Ugly sounds in the night. "Get off my land," Sarah commanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your land." Bull leaned forward in his saddle. "See, that's where you're confused. This'll be Mr. Hartley's land soon enough. Tonight's just a taste of what happens to folks who don't see reason. Next time, might be the house. Might be you and the boy trapped inside when it goes up." Thomas pressed against her side, trembling. Sarah pulled him closer, the rifle heavy in her one-handed grip. Course could all be avoided. Bull continued conversationally. "Sign them papers, take Mr. Hartley's generous offer, and ride out healthy and whole. Otherwise," he gestured at the burning barn, "well, accidents keep happening." One of the other riders, a scraggly man with dead eyes, spoke up. "Pretty woman like that. Bull, maybe she needs more convincing. Maybe we should—" The rifle shot split the night. The bullet whined past the scraggly man's ear, close enough to make him curse and duck. Sarah worked the lever, chambering another round. "The next one won't miss," she said, her voice steady now, cold as winter stone. "Get off my land." Bull's face darkened. "You just made a big mistake, woman. You can't shoot all of us." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But I'll start with you, Henderson. And even if your men get me after, you'll still be dead. That worth Mr. Hartley's money." For a moment, the night held its breath. The barn crackled and groaned, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. Then, from somewhere behind the riders, came the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked. "Evening, boys." Jake Colton emerged from the shadows, his revolver trained steady on Bull's back. "Seems you're trespassing on the lady's property." Bull twisted in his saddle. "Colton, should have known you'd come sniffing around." "Saw the fire from my place." Jake said mildly, Thought I'd investigate. Good thing, too. Be a shame if you boys had an accident in the dark. Easy to mistake a man for a coyote when he's somewhere he shouldn't be. The scraggly rider reached for his gun, but Jake's voice cracked like a whip. Don't! You're not fast enough, and I'm not in a patient mood. 3 against 1, Bull observed. You feeling lucky? Colton. 2 against 2, Jake corrected. Mrs. McKenna's got that Winchester trained on you, and she's already shown she knows how to use it. Plus, I count better in the dark than you do. Henderson, want to test it? The standoff stretched taut. Sarah kept the rifle steady. Though her arms ached, she could feel Thomas holding his breath beside her. Finally, Bull spat into the dirt. This ain't over, mister. Hartley wants this land, and what Mr. Hartley wants, he gets. Not this time, Jake said quietly. Bull wheeled his horse around. Let's go, boys. Let the lady enjoy her bonfire. He looked back at Sarah. Better sleep light, Mrs. McKenna. Never know when another accident might happen. They thundered off into the darkness. Only when the hoofbeats faded did Sarah lower the rifle, her arms trembling with delayed reaction. Jake was beside her instantly, gently taking the weapon from her shaking hands. You hurt the boy. We're fine, Sarah managed. The barn. They turned to watch the structure collapse in a shower of sparks. Everything inside, tools, tack, what little hay she'd managed to store, gone. Could have been worse, Jake said quietly. They meant it to be worse. Sarah understood. If she and Thomas had been sleeping deeper, if the wind had been blowing toward the house, she shuddered. Come on, Jake said. Let's get you both inside. I'll keep watch. In the kitchen, Sarah's hands shook as she tried to light the stove for coffee. Jake gently moved her aside and took over, his movements calm and efficient. Thomas sat at the table, eyes wide and frightened. Mr. Colton, the boy whispered, Are they coming back? Jake knelt beside him, his voice gentle. Not tonight, son. And your ma was real brave. Wasn't she stood them down like a regular frontier woman? She shot at them, Thomas said with a mixture of fear and awe. She did what she had to do to protect you both. Jake's eyes met Sarah's over the boy's head. That's what courage is. Being scared, but doing what needs doing anyway. Sarah sank into a chair, the reality of what had happened washing over her. They burned my barn. They were going to... She couldn't finish. Not in front of Thomas. I know. Jake's voice was grim. This is Hartley's way. Escalate until people break or die. What am I going to do? The question came out as barely a whisper. I can't fight them all. I can't protect. She looked at Thomas, and her voice broke. Jake was quiet for a moment, then pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Sarah, her name on his lips was gentle but firm. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, seeing determination there, and something else, something fierce and protective that made her breath catch. You're not alone in this, he said. I know you're used to handling things yourself. Know you got pride enough for 10 women. But Hartley's declared war, and you can't fight a war alone. Why? Sarah asked suddenly. Why do you care what happens to us? And don't say because of Samuel. This is more than keeping a promise to a dead friend. Jake was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Maybe it started as a promise. Samuel saved my life once. Did he tell you that back in '78 I was tracking Mustangs, got caught in a blizzard, would have frozen to death if he hadn't found me? Brought me to his camp. Man nursed me back to health. Never asked for anything in return. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. When he married you, brought you out here, I saw how happy you made him, how you two built something real on this hard land. Then when he died, Jake's hands clenched on the table. I was supposed to be riding with him that day, but my horse threw a shoe, so I stayed back to fix it. If I'd been there, you'd be dead too, Sarah interrupted firmly. The Jameson gang would have killed you both. Maybe, or maybe we could have fought them off together. Jake shook his head. Either way, I carry that. And yes, at first, helping you is about settling that debt. But somewhere along the way, he looked at her directly then, and Sarah felt her heart skip. Somewhere along the way, it became about more than that. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Jake continued, I'm staying here tonight, no arguments. I'll sleep in what's left of the barn. Keep watch. Tomorrow, we'll figure out next steps. Jake, I can't ask you to... You're not asking... He stood, checking his revolver. Thomas, you take care of your ma tonight. Can you do that for me? The boy nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. Jake retrieved a blanket from the closet and headed for the door. Bar this behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. After he left, Sarah tucked Thomas back into bed, staying with him until he fell asleep. Then she sat by the window, watching Jake's silhouette as he kept vigil in the ruins of her barn. The fire had died to embers, casting a faint glow over the devastation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. No barn meant no shelter for the plow horse, no storage for what little they had. But tonight, with Jake standing guard and her son sleeping safely, Sarah allowed herself one moment of weakness. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and let the tears come. Silent sobs for all she'd lost and all she stood to lose. She didn't see Jake turn at the sound, his face etched with helpless fury. Didn't see him take a step toward the house before forcing himself to stop, to maintain the distance that kept her reputation intact, even as it tore at something deep inside him. The night stretched long and dark, filled with the acrid smell of smoke and the weight of unspoken words. But when dawn finally broke, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Sarah McKenna was still standing, battered, perhaps, afraid, certainly, but unbroken. And she wasn't alone. Sunday morning dawned clear and merciless, the sun already promising another day of punishing heat. Sarah dressed carefully in her church dress, the black one she'd worn since Samuel's funeral. Thomas fidgeted beside her on the wagon seat as they made their way to town. Jake riding alongside on his mare. You don't have to come, Sarah had told him earlier. Yes, I do, he'd replied simply, and something in his tone brooked no argument. The First Methodist Church of Lincoln stood white and pristine against the dusty street, its bell tower reaching toward heaven like a finger of judgment. As they arrived, Sarah felt the weight of eyes upon them. Neighbors who had once smiled now whispered behind gloved hands, their faces masks of righteous disapproval. Chin up, Jake murmured as he helped her down from the wagon. Don't give them the satisfaction. Inside, the congregation was already assembled. Sarah had always sat in the third pew from the back, the widow's row, but today that pew was mysteriously full. The fourth pew, too. She stood uncertainly in the aisle, Thomas's hand in hers, feeling the heat of 100 stares. This way, Jake said quietly, guiding them to an empty pew near the middle family territory, where widows didn't belong, especially not widows accompanied by unmarried men. Reverend Michaels entered, his usually benign face grave. Throughout the service, his eyes returned repeatedly to Sarah, and she knew with sinking certainty that she was to be the subject of today's sermon. Brothers and sisters, the Reverend began after the hymns. We live in trying times. The frontier tests not only our physical fortitude but our moral fiber. It is precisely when we are most challenged that we must hold fastest to righteousness. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation. A woman, the Reverend continued, his gaze finding Sarah, must be a Caesar's wife, above reproach. When tragedy strikes, as it too often does in our harsh land, she must bear her burdens with grace and propriety. To do otherwise, to invite speculation through imprudent associations, is to risk not only her own reputation, but the moral fabric of our community. Sarah felt her cheeks burn. Beside her, Jake had gone very still, a stillness she recognized as dangerous. Of course, Reverend Michaels added smoothly. Christian charity demands we extend help to widows and orphans, but such help must be offered and accepted within proper bounds. When those bounds are crossed, when appearances become questionable, it falls to spiritual leadership to provide guidance. Hypocrite, Jake muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. After the service, Sarah tried to leave quickly, but Reverend Michaels intercepted them at the door. Mrs. McKenna, a word. Jake started to follow, but Sarah touched his arm lightly. Wait with Thomas, please. In the Reverend's small office, Sarah stood ramrod straight, refusing the offered chair. Sarah, Reverend Michaels began, using her Christian name like a weapon of familiarity. I'm concerned about you. Are you? He blinked at her tone, but continued. This business with the Hartley claim? Surely you see it's providential, an opportunity to remove yourself from an untenable situation. Theft is hardly providential. Reverend? Harsh words. He steepled his fingers. Mister, Hartley is a pillar of our community. His wife leads the Ladies' Aid Society. He's offered you a fair price. For land he has no right to. The Reverend sighed. Sarah, you're being stubborn. And this arrangement with Mr. Colton is adding fuel to an already difficult situation. People are talking. Let them talk. I cannot. His facade of patience cracked. Your behavior reflects on this church, on our community. A young widow, entertaining a single man at all hours. Him staying overnight. To protect us from arsonists, Sarah interrupted coldly. Or didn't you hear about my barn? Accidents happen, but what happened after Mr. Colton spending the night? That was choice, not accident. He leaned forward. Sarah, I'm trying to help you. Accept Mr. Hartley's offer. Leave this place. Start fresh somewhere without all this complication. You mean somewhere Josiah Hartley doesn't want my land? Reverend Michael's face hardened. I'm offering Christian counsel. You'd be wise to take it. Sarah turned to leave, then paused at the door. Tell me, Reverend, how much is Hartley paying for the new church bell? His face flushed dark red, but Sarah was already gone. Outside, she found chaos. A crowd had gathered around Jake and Thomas, Josiah Hartley at its center. Hartley was everything Bull Henderson wasn't. Refined, well-dressed, with silver at his temples and the bearing of a man used to getting his way through influence rather than intimidation. Mr. Colton, Hartley was saying smoothly, I understand you've taken quite an interest in the McKenna homestead. I take an interest in justice. Jake replied evenly. Justice, Hartley smiled, cold as winter moonlight. Is that what you call it? And here I thought it might be something baser. The crowd murmured, eating up the scandal. Sarah pushed through them to stand beside Jake and Thomas. Mr. Hartley, she said clearly, if you have business with me, speak to me directly. Ah, the widow McKenna. Hartley tipped his hat mockingly. I was just explaining to Mr. Colton that my offer still stands. Very generous, considering the circumstances. What circumstances would those be? Why, the questionable nature of your claim, of course, and the unfortunate incidents that seem to plague your property. First your husband, then your barn. One might almost think the land itself is cursed. Or that someone is trying to drive me off it. Sarah shot back. Hartley's eyes glittered dangerously. Careful, Mrs. McKenna. Baseless accusations can be legally actionable. Of course, all this unpleasantness could be avoided. $50 an acre, far more than the land is worth. My home is not for sale. Your pride will be your downfall, Hartley said softly, menacingly. I'm offering you a way out with dignity and tact. The alternative. He spread his hands. Well, when the law confirms my prior claim, you'll leave with nothing. We'll see what the law says. Jake interjected. In a fair court. Hartley laughed. Fair, Mr. Colton. You've been in the territory long enough to know better. The law serves those who understand it, and I understand it very well indeed. He turned back to Sarah. 3 weeks, Mrs. McKenna. Then this becomes unpleasant for everyone. His gaze flicked meaningfully to Thomas, and Sarah felt Jake tense beside her. Are you threatening my son? Threatening? Hartley looked shocked. I'm simply observing that frontier life is dangerous for children. So many accidents. Why, young boys go missing all the time, fall down wells, get lost in the wilderness, taken by Indians. He smiled. A mother should be more careful. Jake stepped forward, but Sarah caught his arm. Don't, she whispered. That's what he wants. Hartley chuckled. Listen to her. Colton, violence in front of all these witnesses, that would be unfortunate, although I must say, your protectiveness is touching. Tell me, what exactly are your intentions toward Mrs. McKenna? The crowd held its breath. Sarah felt the weight of their judgment, their eager hunger for scandal. Jake looked Hartley in the eye. My intentions are to see justice done, and to ensure no harm comes to this woman or her son. How noble. Hartley's voice dripped contempt. And I suppose this nobility has nothing to do with Sarah being young and pretty, nothing to do with a lonely man's desires. The words hung in the air like a slap. Several women gasped. Sarah felt humiliation burn through her. But before she could speak, Jake laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to startle everyone. You know, Hartley, Jake said conversationally. You're right about one thing. Mrs. McKenna is a fine woman. Strong, brave, beautiful. Any man with eyes can see that. But you know what else she is? She's Samuel McKenna's widow, and Samuel was the best man I ever knew. So yes, I'll stand by her. I'll protect her and her boy with my life if need be. Not because I have to, but because it's right. And if that bothers you or anyone else, that's your problem, not ours. He offered Sarah his arm. Ma'am, may I escort you to your wagon? Sarah looked at the faces around her. Hartley's fury, Prudence's scandalized delight, the Reverend's disapproval, her neighbor's mix of judgment and secret sympathy. Then she looked at Jake, standing tall and unashamed, offering her dignity in the face of their scorn. She took his arm. Thank you, Mr. Colton. They walked through the crowd, Thomas between them, heads high, behind them. Hartley's voice carried on the wind. 3 weeks, Mrs. McKenna. 3 weeks. At the wagon, Jake helped them up, then mounted his mare. As they rode out of town, Thomas finally spoke. Mr. Colton, why did Mr. Hartley say those things? Jake considered his answer. Sometimes, son, when men want something they can't have, they get mean, try to hurt people with words when they can't hurt them any other way. But we're not doing anything wrong, are we? No, Jake said firmly. We're not. They rode in silence for a while. Then Sarah spoke quietly. You didn't have to say those things. Now they'll talk about you too. Let them talk, Jake echoed her earlier words. I meant what I said. Sarah, every word. She looked at him then, really looked at him. This man who'd chosen to stand with her against the most powerful force in the territory, who'd defended her honor knowing it would cost him too. Jake, she said softly, what are we going to do? We're going to fight, he said simply, and we're going to win. But as they crested the hill and her homestead came into view, Sarah wondered if courage and righteousness were enough against money and power. 3 weeks, Hartley had said. 3 weeks to find proof that might not exist. to stand against a man who owned judges and sheriffs. She squared her shoulders. 3 weeks, then. She'd faced worse odds. And this time, she wouldn't face them alone. The morning sun cast long shadows as Sheriff Watson approached the homestead. Flanked by 2 deputies, Sarah watched them come from her doorway, the court order in their hands as inevitable as death itself. 3 weeks had passed like 3 days, and despite Jake's efforts to find evidence, Hartley's false claim had been upheld by Judge Morrison, a man who owed his position to Hartley's influence. Mrs. McKenna. Sheriff Watson dismounted slowly, his weathered face showing reluctance. I'm sorry about this, but I've got papers here say you need to vacate by sundown. Those papers are based on lies, Sarah said steadily. You know that, Sheriff. Watson shifted uncomfortably. He was a decent man trapped in an indecent system. What I know and what the court says are 2 different things. Judge Morrison ruled in Mr. Hartley's favor. The mineral rights claim predates your homestead filing. A claim that mysteriously appeared just months ago, Jake said, stepping out from the barn where he'd been waiting. Filed by a man who's never set foot on this land until he decided he wanted it. The deputies, younger men with harder faces, placed hands on their guns. Watson held up a warning hand. Colton, don't make this worse. The law's the law. Since when is theft legal? Jake challenged. Since Judge Morrison says so. One of the deputies, a rat-faced man named Briggs, sneered. Now step aside. We got orders to enforce this eviction, peaceful or otherwise. Thomas appeared in the doorway beside his mother, his young face pale but determined. We're not leaving our home. Watson's expression softened. Son, sometimes folks got to do things they don't want to. Your ma needs to think about what's best for you both. What's best is keeping what's rightfully ours, Sarah said. She hadn't moved from the doorway, blocking their entry like a guardian angel. Samuel died for this land. We've bled for it, worked it, made it home. You'll have to drag us off. That can be arranged, Briggs said, starting forward. Jake's gun cleared leather so fast it seemed to teleport to his hand. Touch her and it'll be the last thing you do. Jake, no, Sarah said sharply. That's what they want. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Watson's hand hovered near his own weapon, while the second deputy, a young man named Collins, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Nobody needs to die today, Watson said carefully. Mrs. McKenna, I'm giving you time, 3 days. Get your affairs in order. Make arrangements. After that, if you're still here, I'll have to enforce the court order. 3 days to pack up a life, Sarah said bitterly. How generous. Watson flushed but held his ground. It's more than the judge ordered. Best I can do. He remounted, gesturing for his deputies to follow. Briggs looked disappointed, clearly hoping for violence. 3 days, Watson repeated. Please don't make me come back with more men. After they left, Sarah sank onto the porch step, strength draining from her limbs. Jake holstered his gun and sat beside her, careful to maintain proper distance even now. We could fight, he said quietly. Make a stand. And watch them kill you. Maybe Thomas too. Sarah shook her head. I won't have blood on my land. Not again. So we just give up, let Hartley win? I don't know. The words came out sharper than intended. Sarah pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting tears. I'm so tired, Jake. Tired of fighting. Tired of being afraid. Tired of watching Thomas look over his shoulder everywhere we go. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then, come with me. There's something I need to show you. They saddled horses, Sarah on their old plow horse, Thomas riding double with Jake. He led them west, toward the ridge that marked the boundary of her land, at the base of a large cottonwood tree. Jake dismounted and knelt, brushing away years of accumulated leaves and debris. Samuel and I marked this the day he filed the claim, Jake said, revealing carved initials and a date in the bark, grown thick with age but still legible. S.M. J.C. 1878. We walked the whole boundary, marked each corner. That's sweet, Jake, but carvings on trees won't stand up in Hartley's court. No, Jake agreed. But this might. He pulled out a worn leather journal. Samuel's surveying notes, he gave them to me for safekeeping when he started having trouble with the Jameson gang. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got them. Sarah took the journal with trembling hands. Page after page of Samuel's careful handwriting, documenting every detail of the land claim, including a survey that clearly showed no prior mineral rights existed. Why didn't you show this before? Jake's jaw tightened. Because there's more. Look at the last entry. Sarah flipped to the final pages, dated just days before Samuel's death. Her breath caught as she read. Asterisk Hartley approached again today, offered to buy us out for 10 times what the land's worth. When I refused, he said accidents happen on the frontier. Said the Jameson gang's been active in the area. The threat was clear. I fear for Sarah and Thomas. If something happens to me, Jake will know what to do. He knew, Sarah whispered. Samuel knew Hartley would. Hartley hired the Jameson gang, Jake said flatly. Can't prove it, but Samuel knew it was coming. Sarah stared at the journal, rage building in her chest like a prairie fire. He killed my husband, murdered him for land. Sarah. No, she stood abruptly, pacing. All this time, I thought it was random violence, bad luck, but Hartley planned it. Executed my Samuel like putting down a lame horse. We still can't prove. I don't care about proof, Sarah whirled on him. I care about justice. I care about my son growing up without a father because Josiah Hartley wanted our land. Jake caught her shoulders gently. Sarah, listen to me. This journal, it might be enough to reopen the case, get a federal marshal involved, go over Watson's head. And how long will that take? Months, years, while Hartley's sitting in our home, profiting from murder? What else can we do? Sarah looked at him, and Jake saw something change in her eyes, the last softness burning away, leaving only steel. We don't run, she said. We don't hide. We make our stand. Sarah. They want to fight. They'll get one. I'm done being afraid. Jake, done being the helpless widow everyone pities or scorns. She looked at Thomas, who'd been listening wide-eyed. Your father was murdered. Thomas, the man who did it wants to steal our home. What do you think we should do? Thomas straightened in the saddle. Pa always said McKennas don't run from a fight. No, Sarah agreed. We don't. They returned to the homestead as the sun began its descent. Jake tried once more to reason with her, but Sarah's mind was made. I need you to take Thomas somewhere safe, she said. Your place, maybe, or into town. What are you planning? What I should have done weeks ago. Stand my ground. I'm not leaving you. Jake. No. His voice was iron. Whatever you're planning, we do it together. That's not negotiable. They stood facing each other in the dying light, wills clashing. Finally, Sarah nodded. Together, then. That night, they prepared. Jake cleaned and loaded every weapon in the house. Sarah packed their most precious possessions, the papers, Samuel's watch, her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of their wedding day. If they had to run, they'd be ready. If they had to fight, they'd be ready for that too. Thomas fell asleep at the table, head pillowed on his arms. Jake carried him to bed while Sarah kept watch. When he returned, they sat across from each other, coffee growing cold between them. I need to say something, Jake began, in case tomorrow. Don't, Sarah interrupted. Whatever happens, happens. Words won't change it. Maybe not, but I'll regret it if I don't speak now. He met her eyes. I've loved you since the day Samuel introduced us. Loved you hopeless and silent, because you were his and he was my friend. When he died, I thought that feeling would die too. Thought I could honor his memory by protecting you. Nothing more." Sarah's breath caught, but Jake pressed on. "I was wrong. Every day I've watched you fight for this place. Refuse to bend or break. Raise that boy with courage and grace. I've fallen deeper. I know it's not proper. Know you may not feel the same. But if we don't survive tomorrow, I want you to know that you've been loved. Not just by Samuel, but by me, complete and without condition." The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of unspoken truth. Then Sarah reached across the table, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I know," she whispered. "I've known. And Jake, in another life, another time." "I understand," he said softly. "Do you? Because I'm not sure I do anymore." She squeezed his hand. "Tomorrow, we face whatever comes. After that, if we survive, ask me again." It was more than he dared hope for. Jake lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture both courtly and desperate. Outside, a coyote howled at the rising moon. Tomorrow would bring Sheriff Watson and his men, would bring violence and loss, victory or defeat. But tonight, in this moment, two souls touched across the divide of grief and propriety, finding in each other the strength to face the dawn. Whatever came next, they would meet it standing. The smoke rose black against the dawn sky, visible for miles across the prairie. Sarah stood before her home, torch in hand, watching the flames consume the cabin she'd shared with Samuel, where Thomas had taken his first steps, where she'd learned to be a frontier wife. Every board, every nail represented their dreams, their struggle. Now it would be ash rather than shelter Josiah Hartley. "Mama," Thomas stood beside her, his young face reflecting the dancing flames. "Why are we burning our house?" "Because if we can't have it, neither can they," Sarah answered, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "Sometimes, son, you have to choose what you lose. I choose this." Jake emerged from the barn, leading their horses laden with supplies. He'd argued against this plan, but Sarah had been immovable. "If I must leave," she'd said, "I leave nothing for Hartley to profit from." They mounted up as the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Sarah didn't look back. Behind them, the homestead burned, and ahead lay the uncertain path into the mountains. "Henderson will come," Jake said quietly as they rode. "Him and whoever Hartley can hire." "Let them come," Sarah replied. "They'll find us ready." They rode hard through the morning, following deer trails Jake knew from his years of wandering. By noon, they'd reached the foothills, where ancient pines provided cover and mountain streams ran clear and cold. As the horses drank, Jake studied their back trail. "No dust yet, but they'll pick up our trail at the homestead. We've got maybe half a day's lead." "Where are we going?" Thomas asked, trying to sound brave despite his exhaustion. Jake pointed to the peaks above. "There's an old cave system I used back in my wilder days. Defensible, with water nearby. We can hold out there until we figure our next move." They climbed through the afternoon, the horses laboring on the steep trails. Sarah had hiked her skirts up, riding astride like a man, propriety abandoned in favor of survival. When they finally reached the cave, the sun was sliding toward the western peaks. The cave mouth yawned dark and cool, hidden behind a fall of rocks and twisted pines. Jake went in first, checking for bears or other inhabitants, then emerged nodding. "It's clear. Help me get the supplies inside." They worked quickly, efficiently. Sarah marveled at the cave's interior, larger than expected, with a natural chimney that would disperse smoke, fresh water seeping from a crack in the rock to pool in a natural basin. "You lived here?" she asked. "For a winter, after some trouble in Denver." Jake didn't elaborate, but Sarah could imagine a younger Jake, wild and running from something, holed up like a wolf in these mountains. As darkness fell, They ate cold biscuits and dried meat, afraid to risk a fire that might be seen. Thomas curled against his mother's side, asleep almost instantly, in the cave mouth. Jake kept watch, rifle across his knees. Sarah joined him, unable to sleep. Below them, the prairie stretched endless under starlight. Somewhere down there, her home was cooling ash. Somewhere down there, angry men were planning their pursuit. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "for dragging you into this." Jake turned to her, his face shadowed but his eyes clear. "You didn't drag me anywhere. I choose this." "Why?" The question that had haunted her for months. "You could have walked away any time. Should have." "You really don't know." "I need to hear it." Jake was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "The day Samuel introduced us, you were wearing a yellow dress, had flour in your hair from making bread. You smiled at me like I was worth knowing, not just another drifter. Nobody'd looked at me like that in, maybe ever." He shifted, still watching the darkness below. "Samuel saw it, warned me off in that gentle way of his. She's my world. Jake," he said, "I trust you to remember that." And I did. Locked it away. Settled for being friend to you both. After he died, I told myself it was duty, protecting my friend's widow. Noble, safe. He laughed softly, bitterly. But every day I saw your courage, your determination to survive when lesser folks would have given up. Saw you with Thomas, keeping Samuel's memory alive while building your own strength. And that locked door in my heart broke wide open. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Jake, I know it's too soon. Know you may never feel for me what you felt for him. But Sarah, I'd rather die protecting you than live knowing I walked away." The words hung between them like a physical presence. Sarah reached out, touching his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin. "You beautiful, foolish man," she whispered. "Do you think I'd let just anyone risk their life for us? Do you think my heart is so small it can only hold one love in a lifetime?" Jake turned into her touch, eyes closing. "Sarah, when this is over," she said, "when we're safe and free, ask me again. Ask me properly. If we survive, we will." She said it fierce, willing it true. "We have to." A sound from below made them both freeze. Horses, moving fast up the trail. Jake pressed field glasses to his eyes, studying the moonlit slope. 6 riders, he reported. Henderson leading. Sarah woke Thomas gently, finger to her lips. The boy came alert instantly, fear and trust warring in his young face. They retreated deeper into the cave as the sound of horses grew louder. "McKenna," Henderson's voice boomed from outside. "We know you're up there. Saw your tracks plain as day. Come out now. Make this easy on everyone." Jake positioned himself behind a natural barricade of stone, rifle trained on the cave mouth. Sarah took up position on the opposite side, Winchester ready, between them. Thomas huddled with their supplies, Samuel's Colt revolver heavy in his small hands. "Got nothing to say to you. Henderson," Sarah called out, "Get off my mountain." "Your mountain," Henderson laughed. "Lady, you got nothing now. No home, no land, no legal leg to stand on. Mister, Hartley's being generous, offering to let you walk away. All you gotta do is sign the papers. Make it legal-like. Tell Hartley he can burn in hell alongside my husband's murderers." Silence greeted this pronouncement. Then Henderson's voice, harder now. "That's unfortunate talk, Mrs. McKenna. Dangerous talk. See, Mr. Hartley's a forgiving man, but even he's got limits. You've burned his property, fled lawful eviction. That makes you criminals. And out here, well, criminals sometimes don't make it to trial." "Try it," Jake called out. "First man through that entrance gets a bullet, maybe the second too. Which of you boys wants to die for Hartley's money? Murmured conversation outside. Sarah strained to hear, catching fragments. Wait them out. Water. The boy. Tell you what, Henderson called. We'll give you the night to think it over. Come morning, you come out peaceful, or we come in shooting. Your choice. The sound of retreating footsteps, horses being led away, but not far. Sarah could hear them setting up camp just out of rifle range. They were trapped, exactly as Henderson intended. They'll try to wait us out, Jake said grimly. Probably post guards on any other exit. Then we wait too, Sarah replied. We've got water, food for a few days. And then, she met his eyes steadily, then we make them pay for every inch. Jake smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his weathered face. That's my girl. The endearment slipped out natural as breathing. Sarah felt warmth bloom in her chest despite their dire circumstances. Get some rest, Jake said. I'll take first watch. Sarah curled up with Thomas, but sleep eluded her. She thought of Samuel, wondering what he'd make of this situation. Would he approve of her choices of Jake? Asterisk. Yes, asterisk came the answer from some deep part of her heart. He'd want you to live, to fight, to love again. Mama, Thomas whispered. Are we going to die? No, baby, Sarah whispered back, fierce and certain. We're going to live. We're going to win. And then we're going to build a new life, far from here. Would you like that? A new adventure? With Mr. Jake. Sarah's heart squeezed. Would that be all right with you? Pa would want us to be happy, Thomas said with a child's simple wisdom. And Mr. Jake makes us happy. From his position at the cave mouth, Jake heard every word. His hand tightened on his rifle as he made a silent vow to Samuel's memory. I'll get them through this, friend, whatever it takes. Outside, Henderson's men built their fires, confident in their superior numbers. But in the cave, 3 souls bound by love and determination prepared for the dawn. They were outnumbered, outgunned, cornered. But they were not beaten. Not yet, not ever. The mountains settled into watchful silence. Ancient stone indifferent to human drama. But in that small cave, hope burned brighter than any fire, and love proved stronger than fear. Tomorrow would bring blood and thunder. Tonight, they had each other. It was enough. The morning came cold and gray, mist clinging to the mountainside like a shroud. Sarah woke to Jake's gentle touch on her shoulder, his face grim in the pale light filtering through the cave mouth. They're moving, he whispered, getting ready to come up. Sarah checked the Winchester, then looked at Thomas. Her boy was already awake, Samuel's revolver clutched in his small hands. Trying so hard to be brave, she kissed his forehead. Remember what I taught you, she said softly. Only if they get past us. Only if you have no choice. I remember, Mama. Jake had moved back to the cave entrance, studying the activity below. Henderson splitting his men, 3 staying with the horses, 3 coming up. He paused. Sarah, there's still time. We could negotiate. No, her voice was iron. They'll get nothing from me but bullets. The first shots came without warning, peppering the rocks around the cave mouth. Sarah and Jake pressed against the walls as ricochets whined through the air. When the volley ceased, Jake risked a quick look. They're using cover, working their way up. Smart. Then we make them pay for every yard. Sarah sighted down the Winchester, waiting. The first man showed himself 50 yards down, just a flash of shoulder behind a pine. Sarah's shot caught him clean, spinning him out from cover. His scream echoed off the mountains before cutting short. One down, she said coldly, working the lever. Return fire erupted, but the cave mouth provided good protection. Jake picked his shots carefully, patient as a hunter. Another cry from below told of his marksmanship. "McKenna!" Henderson's voice boomed from somewhere below. "That's 2 of my men. Give up now, or I swear we'll show no mercy." "You showed no mercy when you burned my barn," Sarah shouted back. "When you threatened my son, when you murdered my husband." "Your husband died to outlaws. Woman, nothing to do with us." "Liar!" Sarah's voice cracked with rage. "We know Hartley hired them. We have proof." Silence greeted this. Then Henderson's voice, different now, calculating proof what proof. Jake touched her arm in warning, but Sarah was past caution. Samuel's journal, his survey notes, everything we need to bury Hartley in federal prison. "Well now," Henderson called. "That changes things. Tell you what, you give us that journal. We'll let you walk away. The boy, too. Fair trade." "Go to hell." More gunfire. Sustained this time. Sarah counted muzzle flashes, 4 guns firing, which meant Henderson and 3 others were still active. 2 down, but 4 remaining, plus whoever was with the horses. "They're trying to flank us," Jake observed, noting movement on their left. "There must be another way up." As if to confirm his words, a shot came from an unexpected angle, striking the cave wall and showering them with rock fragments. Thomas cried out, a cut on his cheek bleeding freely. "Get back!" Sarah pushed him deeper into the cave, then turned to Jake. "Watch the mouth. I'll handle the flank." She moved through the shadows, following the cave's curve. There, a narrow crevice she hadn't noticed before, barely wide enough for a man. As she watched, a figure squeezed through. Sarah didn't hesitate. The Winchester boomed in the confined space, deafening. The figure jerked and fell backward, wedging in the crevice. Behind him, someone cursed vilely. "That's 3 of yours. Henderson," she called. "How many more want to die for Hartley's money?" The attack intensified. Sarah and Jake fought with desperate efficiency, making every shot count, but their ammunition wouldn't last forever, and Henderson knew it. He was willing to trade men for time, knowing eventually the defenders would run dry. "Jake!" Sarah gasped between shots. "We can't hold them forever." "I know." Jake's face was streaked with powder smoke and sweat. "Take Thomas. There's a passage at the back. Leads out to the north face. It's a hard climb, but I'm not leaving you." "Sarah." "No." She grabbed his shirt. "We go together or not at all." A new voice interrupted their argument. "Quite touching." They spun to find Josiah Hartley himself standing at the cave mouth, flanked by 4 fresh gunmen. The rancher was immaculate despite the climb, his silver hair perfectly styled, his clothes unmarred by dust or sweat. "You, Mr. Hartley," Henderson called from below. "We've got them pinned." "I can see that, Bull," Hartley interrupted smoothly. "Though at considerable cost. 3 men dead for 1 woman and a drifter inefficient." "Drop your weapons," one of Hartley's men ordered. Jake and Sarah exchanged glances. They were outnumbered, nearly out of ammunition, with Thomas behind them. Slowly, reluctantly, they lowered their guns. Excellent. Hartley stepped into the cave, examining it with distaste. How the mighty fall, from a promising homestead to a cave like animals. Pride misses. McKenna has a steep price. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, though she knew the answer. "What I've always wanted, the land, though now I'll need compensation for the house you destroyed, the men you've killed, the inconvenience you've caused." His eyes glittered coldly. The journal Henderson mentioned would be a start. "I'll give you nothing." Hartley sighed. "I thought as much." He nodded to his men. "Take the boy." "No!" Sarah lunged forward, but a rifle butt to her stomach doubled her over. Jake started to move and found 3 guns trained on him. Thomas backed away, terrified. "Mama?" "It's simple," Hartley said conversationally as his men grabbed Thomas. "The journal and a signed deed for the boy's life. More than fair, considering. Sarah looked at her son's frightened face, at Jake standing rigid with controlled fury, at Hartley's satisfied smile. Everything they'd fought for, everything Samuel had died for, balanced against Thomas's life. "Don't do it, Mama," Thomas said, his voice small but steady. "Pa wouldn't want—" "Quiet, boy," Hartley snapped. Then, to Sarah. "Well," Sarah straightened slowly, her hand moving to her pocket. "The journal's here. Let me—" The explosion was deafening. Where Hartley had stood, only smoke and ringing silence remained. Through the haze, Sarah saw Jake, Samuel's backup revolver smoking in his hand, the one she'd hidden in her pocket, now in his grasp. "Nobody threatens the boy," Jake said quietly. Chaos erupted. Hartley's men, shocked by their employer's sudden death, hesitated a fatal second. Jake and Sarah moved as one, grabbing their weapons. In the confined space, the gunfight was brief and brutal. When the smoke cleared, Hartley and his men lay still. Henderson, hearing the shots, had fled with whoever remained. They could hear horses galloping away, heading down the mountain fast. Thomas ran to Sarah, burying his face against her. She held him tight, her own hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over, baby." "No," Jake said grimly, checking the bodies. "Now we're truly outlaws. Killing Hartley, justified or not, makes us wanted. We need to move." Sarah looked at the cave that had sheltered them, at the bodies of their enemies, at the man who'd fought beside her. Where? Wyoming, Colorado, somewhere far from Nebraska and Hartley's influence. Jake met her eyes. "If you'll have me, if you'll trust me to take you somewhere safe." Sarah looked at Thomas, saw him nod. Her heart, so long focused only on survival, suddenly expanded with possibility. "Yes," she said simply. They gathered their supplies quickly, knowing Henderson might return with more men. With the law. As they prepared the horses, Jake stopped Sarah with a gentle hand. "I need to say it now, in case we don't get another chance." He took a deep breath. "Sarah McKenna, I love you. Have loved you for longer than I had any right. I promise to protect you and Thomas, to work honest, to build you a new home wherever we land. Will you have me?" Sarah looked at this man who'd risked everything for them, who'd stood against impossible odds without flinching. She thought of Samuel, of the love they'd shared, and realized her heart was big enough for both, the cherished memory and the living promise. "Get your things," she said softly, echoing words from what seemed a lifetime ago. "You're mine now. Jake Colton, mine and Thomas's. Forever." He kissed her then, there in that cave of death and deliverance, with her son watching and approving. When they broke apart, all three were crying for what was lost, for what was found, for what lay ahead. They mounted up as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the mountains gold. Behind them lay ashes and graves, bitter memory and sweet revenge. Ahead stretched unknown trails and unnamed towns. Hardship certainly, but also hope. "Ready?" Jake asked. Thomas riding with him now, Sarah on her own mount. "Ready," Sarah confirmed, taking one last look at the mountains that had sheltered them. "Let's go home." "We don't have a home," Thomas pointed out with a child's literal mind. "We will," Jake promised, spurring his horse forward. "We will." They rode into the rising sun, three souls bound by love and loss, violence and redemption. The frontier had tested them with everything it had: drought, death, greed, brutality. They had not broken. In years to come, the story would be told in whispers. The widow who burned her own home rather than surrender it, who fought off hired killers in a mountain cave, who found love in the ashes of tragedy. Some would call her fool, others hero. Sarah McKenna Colton, riding between her son and her new love toward an uncertain future. was simply herself, unbroken, unafraid, and finally, utterly free. The narrow canyon stretched before them like a gateway to hell, red rock walls rising sheer on either side, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. Jake pulled up sharply, his instincts screaming danger. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "Something's wrong." Sarah scanned the canyon, seeing nothing but shadows and stone. "What is it?" "Too quiet. No birds, no insects. And look." Jake pointed to fresh horse tracks in the dust. "Multiple riders went in, but I don't see tracks coming out." Thomas shifted nervously behind Jake. "Maybe they went through." "Maybe." Jake's voice carried doubt. "Or maybe they're waiting inside." They'd been riding hard for 3 days since the cave, staying off main trails, sleeping in shifts. The pursuit they'd expected hadn't materialized, which worried Jake more than running gunfights would have. Henderson wasn't the type to give up. "There's another way," Sarah said, studying the landscape. "Over the ridge." "It'll take longer, but..." The shot rang out before she could finish, whining off the rocks inches from her horse's head. The animal reared, nearly throwing her before she brought it under control. "Ride!" Jake shouted, wheeling his mount as more shots erupted from the canyon depths. They spurred hard back the way they'd come, bullets chasing them like angry hornets. They didn't stop until they reached a defensible cluster of boulders a mile back. Jake helped Thomas down, then checked their back trail with field glasses. 8 riders coming out of the canyon, he reported grimly. Henderson leading. Sarah's heart sank. They'd walked right into the trap, only luck and Jake's caution saving them from riding into a killing box. How did he get ahead of us? Must have guessed we'd head for Wyoming, taken the main road while we skulked on back trails. Jake lowered the glasses. "They've got fresh horses, supplies. We can't outrun them." "Then we fight," Sarah said, checking her Winchester. 8 against 2, with Thomas to protect. Jake shook his head. "Those aren't odds. That's suicide." "Then what?" Jake studied the terrain with a frontiersman's eye. "There, that draw leading up to the mesa. If we can reach the top, we might find better ground." They mounted again, Thomas clinging tight as they raced for the draw. Behind them, Henderson's group spread out, trying to cut off their escape. Shots rang out, but the distance was too great for accuracy. The draw was steep, treacherous with a loose shale that sent their horses scrambling. Sarah's mount went down once, nearly crushing her before she rolled clear. Jake pulled her up behind him, abandoning the injured animal. "They're closing," Thomas cried, looking back. Indeed, Henderson's men had reached the base of the draw, but the narrow passage worked both ways. They could only come up single file. "Keep going," Jake urged. "Almost there." They crested the mesa as the sun touched the western horizon, painting everything blood red. The flat expanse offered little cover-scattered rocks, a few stunted junipers, and a wagon. Sarah stared at the abandoned Conestoga sitting incongruously in the middle of nowhere, its canvas top shredded by wind and time. "Old immigrant trail," Jake explained quickly. "Folks who didn't make it." He steered toward the wagon as the first of Henderson's men appeared at the mesa's edge. A shot from Jake's rifle sent the man tumbling back down the draw, but more were coming. They reached the wagon, using it for cover. Jake positioned himself at one end, Sarah at the other. Thomas huddled beneath with what remained of their supplies. "We're surrounded up here," Sarah observed. The mesa had seemed like salvation, but now she saw it for what it was, a trap of their own making. "Maybe," Jake agreed, then smiled grimly. "But they have to come to us, and this wagon's better than no cover at all." Henderson's men spread out as they gained the mesa, moving to encircle the defenders. The big foreman himself stayed back, letting his hired guns take the risks. "Misses." "McKenna," Henderson called as his men took positions. You've led us quite a chase, but it's over now. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of places to run." "Still have bullets," Sarah called back. "Come and get them." Brave talk from a dead woman. "You killed Mr. Hartley. That's murder in any court. Even if you surrender, you'll hang." "He was threatening my son." "Your word against dead men. Who do you think they'll believe?" Jake touched her arm. "He's trying to rattle you. Focus." The attack came at sunset. Henderson's men firing from multiple angles. Jake and Sarah responded with careful shots, making each one count. The wagon provided decent cover, but splinters flew with each impact, and their ammunition dwindled with frightening speed. One attacker got bold, rushing from rock to rock, trying to flank them. Sarah tracked him, waited for the right moment, then dropped him 10 feet from the wagon. Another tried from Jake's side with similar results. "That's 5 of your men dead." "Henderson," Jake shouted. "How many more you willing to lose?" "As many as it takes. Colton, I've got more men and more bullets than you." Full dark brought a temporary lull. Sarah slumped against the wagon wheel, exhausted. They were down to their last box of cartridges, split between 2 rifles and Jake's revolver. "Mama, I'm scared," Thomas whispered from beneath the wagon. "I know, baby, but we're together. That's what matters." "Sarah," Jake said quietly, "I've been thinking, if I create a distraction, draw them off, you and Thomas might—" "No." "Listen." "No." Her voice was fierce. "We stand together or fall together. No noble sacrifices. Not from you." Jake looked at her in the starlight. This woman who'd become everything to him. "All right, together." "Mr. Jake." Thomas crawled out to sit between them. "I want you to know, if you marry Mama, I'd be proud to call you Pa." Jake's throat tightened. He pulled the boy close. "And I'd be proud to call you son." They sat there, the 3 of them, as Henderson's men prepared for the final assault. Sarah found herself thinking not of death but of life, the life they might have had in Wyoming or Colorado, building a new home, raising Thomas, maybe giving him brothers and sisters. "Get ready," Jake warned, seeing movement in the darkness. The attack came from all sides at once. Muzzle flashes lit the night like deadly fireflies. Jake and Sarah fired steadily, picking targets, but they were too many. A bullet gouged the wagon bed inches from Thomas. Another took Jake's hat off. Sarah felt one tug at her sleeve, drawing blood. They were down to their last rounds when Jake suddenly laughed, a sound so unexpected that Sarah thought he'd gone mad. "What?" "Listen," he said. At first, Sarah heard only gunfire. Then, beneath it, something else. Hoofbeats. Many hoofbeats. Coming fast. Who? The new arrivals announced themselves with a volley that sent Henderson's men scrambling. By the muzzle flashes, Sarah counted at least a dozen riders, moving with military precision. "Federal Marshals!" a voice boomed. "Everybody drop your weapons. This fight is over." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Henderson made the mistake of firing at the newcomers. The response was swift and overwhelming. When the smoke cleared, Henderson lay still, his remaining men throwing down their guns. A figure approached the wagon, badge glinting in the starlight. "Mrs. McKenna Jake Colton. I'm Marshal Tom Garrett. We've been tracking Henderson's bunch for 2 days." "How?" Sarah managed, hardly believing their deliverance. "Young fellow named Collins used to be a deputy in Lincoln. Had a crisis of conscience after Hartley died. Rode hard to Fort Laramie with quite a story. About murdered homesteaders, corrupt judges, a widow fighting for justice." The marshal studied them. "That journal Henderson was after, you still have it." Sarah pulled Samuel's journal from inside her coat, hands shaking. "Every word true." "I believe it. We've been investigating Hartley for months. Your husband wasn't the first homesteader to die convenient for his land grabs." Garrett's voice gentled. "I'm sorry we didn't get there sooner." "What happens now? Jake asked. Now you come with us. Give your statements. There'll be an inquest. But with Collins testifying and that journal, I doubt any jury would convict you. Hartley drew first from what Collins saw. And after, Sarah barely dared hope. After, the marshal smiled. Ma'am, the government owes you. Your husband died exposing a criminal conspiracy. I expect there'll be compensation. Maybe even that land restored to you. I don't want it, Sarah said firmly. Too much blood on it. Too many ghosts. Then you're free to go wherever you please. Start fresh. He looked between Sarah and Jake. Together. I'm guessing. Together. Jake confirmed, taking Sarah's hand. They made camp there on the mesa, marshals standing guard. As dawn broke, Sarah stood with Jake and Thomas, looking out over the vast landscape spreading before them. Somewhere out there was their future, a piece of land not soaked in sorrow, a home built on love rather than loss. Where will we go? Thomas asked. Wherever the trail takes us, Jake answered. We'll know when we find it. Sarah leaned into him, feeling his strength, his steadiness. Samuel would rest easier knowing they were safe, knowing Thomas had a father again, knowing love had bloomed from the ashes of grief. Ready to ride? Jake asked. Sarah looked at her son, at the man who'd become their protector, their salvation, their future. She thought of all they'd endured, the drought, the threats, the violence, the long flight through darkness. They'd lost everything and found something better. Ready, she said, mounting up. Let's go find our home. They rode out with the marshals, leaving the mesa and its ghosts behind. The sun climbed high and bright, warming their faces, lighting their way. Behind them lay Nebraska and bitter memory. Ahead stretched possibility, infinite as the prairie sky. Sarah McKenna had begun this journey as a widow, desperate and alone. She continued it as Sarah Colton, beloved and protected, mother and soon-to-be wife. The frontier had tested her with everything it had. She had not merely survived, she had triumphed. And somewhere in Wyoming or Colorado or wherever the trail led, a new homestead waited, a place where Thomas would grow strong and tall, where other children might run laughing through rooms built by Jake's hands, where love would season every meal and warm every night. The West was still wild, still dangerous, but Sarah had learned its secret that courage and love together could conquer any challenge, survive any storm. As they rode toward their new beginning, she heard Jake humming soft and low, a hymn she recognized from long Sunday services. She joined in, their voices blending like their lives, like their hearts. Thomas smiled between them, safe and loved and heading home. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. If you're enjoying these stories of courage, love, and survival on the American frontier, I'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. It's always amazing to connect with fellow Western enthusiasts across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales. And share your thoughts about Sarah and Jake's journey. Did their story touch your heart? What part moved you most? Your feedback helps me craft stories that resonate with you. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own horizons.